Buenas tardes, Majestad. Va a dar comienzo la sesión de la tarde con la conversación entre presidentes de Cortes supranacionales, precisamente sobre el mayor legado de la jueza Ruth Bader Ginsburg, la igualdad de todos ante la ley. A continuación, es para mí un honor ceder la palabra al moderador de la mesa, el juez de la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos y su presidente durante los años 2018 y 2019, don Eduardo Ferrer MacGregor.
Your Majesty, Excellencies, dear guests, authorities, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, muy buenas tardes, muy buenos días también para quienes nos están siguiendo en América. I am highly honored to be here with you today in this opening session of the World Law Congress, which gathers the key actors in the legal practice of the world. I would like to thank Javier Cremades, President of the World Jurists Association, for such impressive organization and for this dedication culminating in this magnificent event. As Javier previously mentioned, Madrid has become the law capital of the world once again. It is no coincidence that this worldwide reaching session is devoted to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Justice Ginsburg dedicated her life to the unwavering struggle for equal dignity and rights for all people, and especially for women. We are grateful to be blessed with the presence of her daughter, Jane Ginsburg, who is a prestigious law professor at Columbia Law School. To introduce this panel, now we will see a video presentation from Justice Stephen Breyer, Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. As you know, Justice Breyer sat alongside Justice Ginsburg for more than 25 years. Can we please see the video?
What would you say to these people gathering in Madrid this afternoon, just rendering tribute to a figure like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was not their own culture, but they really respect her impact and admire the contribution to the world, to the rule of law? What would you say?
I'd say that was one of her great interests, and she felt was important to gather judges together from different countries, to have judges pay attention so that law pays attention to what each other do. And we from many countries have the same ideals. We believe in democracy, basic human rights, a degree of equality. No single group of people gets too powerful, and a rule of law. A rule of law, after all, is a safeguard. It's a safeguard against arbitrary, capricious, tyrannical, dictatorial, authoritarian. It's not the only safeguard, and it can't work by itself. But what I think in common, what we try to do our jobs. We try to be fair. We try as best we can to bring justice into our decisions. That's our object. And we are, as individuals, alone. You know your cases. I know my cases. You know your decisions. I know what I have to decide. But we can learn from each other. And we can understand that feeling as a judge of being somewhat alone, because no one knows whether you have been true to the record in the case, Have you been true to what the parties have been saying? Have you been true to the law, where it's a complicated matter? Have you been true to those principles of justice that lie behind the law? You know, I know, others don't know. The newspapers say you're brave. What does that mean? That means you agree with them. It's inside. And therefore, we can understand each other. We understand the nature of the job. We understand the nature of looking beyond our own shores in today's world for finding out how other people handle similar problems. And that will grow more and more. This disease will not stop it. It will encourage it. Disease comes in part from abroad. Environment comes all over the world. Economics is everywhere with technology. And we want to do our best. You know, that's obvious, to see that justice and the rule of law is part of it.
Strong message on the need for judicial dialogue, to gather judges together from different countries and cultures. Justice Ginsburg believed in that. As Justice Breyer said, we need that judges pay attention to what other judges do all over the world. Judges can learn from each other when they share the same ideas, principles, and values, such as democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. That's the spirit of judicial dialogue. In the same spirit, I am pleased to moderate this panel of dialogue between international judges. Dialogue on the contributions of international courts to equality and the rule of law. I give the warmest welcome to this panel to Your Excellencies, Presidents and Vice President of 5 of the most important courts in the world. Honorable Judge Elizabeth Odio Benito, President of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Honorable Lady Justice Imani Daud Aboud, President of the African Court of Human and People's Rights. Honorable Judge Robert Spano, President of the European Court of Human Rights. Honorable Judge Piotr Hofmansky, President of the International Criminal Court. Honorable Judge Rosario Silva de la Puerta, Vice President of the European Court of Justice. And we also welcome Honorable Diego Garcia Sayan, former President of the Inter-American Court and current United Nations Special Reporter on the independence of judges and lawyers, who will give us the opening remarks. The first 3 constitute the regional human rights courts of the world, with jurisdictions over the Americas, Africa, and Europe, respectively. The International Criminal Court investigates and tries individuals charged with the gravest crime of concern to international community. And the European Court of Justice, or the Luxembourg Court, is the authentic interpreter of the European Union law. Altogether, they represent 3 systems: regional human rights systems, an international criminal system, and a regional integration system. All of these courts have in common that they are part of a new generation of international or supranational tribunals that have taken a new stand in international law, one that gives full capacity to the individual to act before them. In addition, the 5 of them have paved ways by different forms and in their respective jurisdictions to the contribution to equality and the rule of law. For instance, by granting access to justice to all individuals without discrimination, in recent years, these courts have made visible the special situation of vulnerability of many people and rule on comprehensive reparations. Also, the enormous impact of international courts on breaking impunity for gross human rights violations and international crimes cannot be underestimated. In this regard, international courts remain strategic institutions to fulfill the 2030 Agenda of the United Nations for Sustainable Development Goals. Goal 16, aims to promote peace, justice, and strong institutions. And that's precisely what international courts do: promote peaceful and inclusive societies through access to justice for all, and by building effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at national and international level. These are some reasons why today's panel is so important. From this standpoint, there are a few people like Diego Garcia Sayan, former president of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights and current United Nations Special Reporter on the independence of judges and lawyers, who have a comprehensive view of the matter of equality and the rule of law in international courts. Therefore, I would like to give the floor to Diego for some opening remarks on this subject. Bienvenido, querido Diego. En 2013, hace ya casi 9 años, me recibiste en la Corte Interamericana como presidente. Ahora te damos la más cordial bienvenida en este diálogo de jueces internacionales. We're very pleased to have you here, Diego. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias, Eduardo. Majesty, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First, let me express my appreciation to Javier and to the World Association of Jurists for the organization of this activity, and for that, especially for that tribute for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which is absolutely representative of all what Eduardo has just summarized, and for the creation of the award that has been established by the association. Really, the matter that we are going to touch today has a direct implication with rule of law and with the best and more efficient way to achieve equality in the actual world. En el contexto internacional actual, las cortes internacionales, que a veces son poco conocidas por el gran público, juegan un papel absolutamente fundamental. Un papel fundamental en algo que va en la misma línea conceptual de la que Ruth Bader Ginsburg impulsó durante toda su vida, que es la creación de derecho a través de la decisión de tribunales. Cortes internacionales que en distintos planos juegan hoy día, tanto en las relaciones internacionales como en la justicia frente a crímenes de lesa humanidad o como en temas de derechos humanos, un papel absolutamente fundamental. Pensemos solamente en la Corte Internacional de Justicia, la más antigua de todos, que tiene varias décadas de existencia, que juega en varias regiones del mundo un papel muy importante para que situaciones de tensión que en otros contextos podrían haber derivado en conflictos armados se procesen a través de procesos judiciales. Por ejemplo, lo que ocurre en América Latina, en donde el último conflicto armado internacional ocurrió hace 40 años. En el interín ha habido no menos de una decena de procesos judiciales a través de la Corte Internacional de Justicia para resolver temas limítrofes, temas de acceso a espacios marítimos y otros que hoy día tienen por lo menos a 7 países latinoamericanos y 1 del Caribe en procesos en la Corte Internacional de Justicia. Entonces, no es el espacio que tiene que ver con lo que hoy día atrae nuestra atención, pero sin duda es un elemento absolutamente central que tiene que ser hoy día recapitulado. Las Cortes de Derechos Humanos, como ha mencionado con tanta claridad el señor moderador y amigo Eduardo Ferrer MacGregor, han jugado y siguen jugando un papel fundamental en un doble sentido. Primero, para resolver casos, los casos que le llegan a la Corte cuando se ha agotado la jurisdicción interna y llega al Tribunal Africano, al Tribunal Europeo o a la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos. Pero en segundo lugar, como un elemento gatillador de decisiones normativas y jurisdiccionales nacionales, de manera que sean las Cortes nacionales las que creen también su derecho para que casos como los que habían motivado ciertas sentencias de la Corte Internacional puedan resolverlos los tribunales nacionales. Así, por ejemplo, la Corte Interamericana estableció una definición sobre las desapariciones forzadas que se incorporó gradualmente en la legislación penal de varios países de América Latina en prevención de la repetición de ese fenómeno. Las reparaciones, entendidas como fenómeno que debe beneficiar no solamente a la víctima individual, sino a espacios colectivos, cuando las víctimas son, por ejemplo, comunidades indígenas, como es el caso de muchas situaciones que se han producido en Iberoamérica en las últimas semanas, en las últimas décadas. Entonces, y el aspecto tan importante de la no discriminación, sea por razones étnicas o por cuestiones de orientación sexual, en donde la Corte Interamericana y, por supuesto, el Tribunal Europeo han dictado jurisprudencia muy importante que, siendo vinculante, lo importante es no solamente que se cumpla y ejecute el fallo, sino que incorpore un razonamiento y una manera de ver las cosas que haga innecesario que se tenga que volver a recurrir al Tribunal Regional para contemplar otro caso de derechos humanos. Y, por supuesto, otros tribunales que también pueden tener relevancia importante, como es, por supuesto, la Corte derivada del Estatuto de Roma, que juega un papel tan importante en el procesamiento de personas indicadas como criminales de guerra o violadores masivos de derechos humanos. Hay un paralelo, entonces, con la trayectoria de Ruth Bader Ginsburg en lo que es el papel de la justicia como creación de derecho más allá del texto escrito de la ley, del texto escrito de las constituciones nacionales. Pero también algunos retos muy importantes. Son muchísimos y como mis palabras son solamente introductorias, quería mencionar al paso solamente 3, ¿no? Estamos en un contexto en donde el tema de la igualdad es un aspecto fundamental. Y ahí hay un asunto en donde hay mucho por hacer todavía en la propia composición de los tribunales internacionales. El más antiguo de los tribunales, que ya ha tenido más de 100 personas, 100 magistrados, la Corte Internacional de Justicia, ha tenido solo 4 mujeres que sean miembros de la Corte Internacional de Justicia, lo que es absolutamente revisable y tiene que modificarse. Los otros tribunales, los tribunales regionales, no estoy hablando todavía de los tribunales de derechos humanos, tienen máximo, en promedio, un 20% de magistradas mujeres, lo que es algo que tendría que ser también considerado como un tema a revisar. Y las Cortes de Derechos Humanos, en buena medida gracias al Tribunal Africano, en donde de los 12 integrantes, 6 son mujeres, tienen también que dar pasos en positivo para un equilibrio de género absolutamente indispensable. Entonces, este es un asunto muy importante, porque en segundo lugar, como se mencionó en la mañana, la pandemia ha agravado las situaciones de exclusión, ha agravado también situaciones de violencia doméstica y hace que sean necesarias nuevas dimensiones de retos para prevenir la exclusión de la mujer en la justicia y para prevenir que la pandemia o situaciones parecidas puedan ser espacios para la violación de los derechos de la mujer y afectar sus facultades fundamentales. Y en tercer lugar, un aspecto absolutamente central que aquí hay que resaltar, ¿no? Un tribunal internacional, la Corte Penal Internacional, hace no mucho tiempo estuvo bajo ataque político sostenido por parte de un gobierno que ya no está vigente, que terminó su periodo. La Corte Penal Internacional no merecía, ni era concordante con el derecho internacional, que sus magistrados y magistradas, que su staff estuvieran sujetos a sanciones, que estuvieran sujetos a amenazas. Nunca puede repetirse en el mundo una situación en donde un tribunal internacional, regional, cualquiera que sea la materia que tenga entre manos, sea sujeto a amenazas o a presiones de esa naturaleza, pues su independencia tiene que ser absolutamente preservada como un tema, como un reto de prioridad global y de prioridad internacional. Entonces, para mí es realmente un honor poder dar estas palabras introductorias bajo la convicción de que en ese mismo enfoque conceptual, de que a través de la justicia, la igualdad puede ser concretada, puede ser afirmada, puede ser desarrollada, cada uno de los tribunales internacionales, dentro de lo que es materia de su competencia, pueden jugar también un papel en ese sentido. La experiencia nos está diciendo que se pueden prevenir conflictos y sí, que es posible mejorar la conducta de los estados, la conducta de los tribunales nacionales en materia de derechos humanos y de derecho humanitario a través de esa jurisprudencia. El ejemplo de Ruth Bader Ginsburg tiene todavía mucho que hacer por delante para que haya un verdadero planeta en respeto total de los derechos fundamentales y para que haya un equilibrio de género. Mi siguiente informe a la Asamblea General versará precisamente sobre eso, cómo llegar en un plazo razonable a que la mitad de los tribunales internos en todos los niveles y a nivel internacional tengan por lo menos un 50% de sus integrantes en el género femenino. Muchísimas gracias a ustedes por la gentil atención y el honor que tengo de estar acompañado por representantes de altísima calidad individual de tribunales que merecen la más alta consideración, respeto y apoyo. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, querido Diego. Thank you very much, Diego García Sayán, United Nations Special Reporter on the Independence of Judges and Lawyers. After these opening remarks, I would like to begin with our distinguished panelists. First up will be the President of the Inter-American Court, Judge Elizabeth Odio Benito, who has been an international judge in 3 different courts. As you might know, alongside the Inter-American Court, President Odio Benito, a national from Costa Rica, has served as judge at the International Criminal Court and the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. Her decisions were vital for the prosecution of gender-based international crimes and the use of the gender lens by international courts. Querida Elizabeth, querida Presidenta, muchísimas gracias por tu participación el día de hoy. Sabemos que es muy temprano en Costa Rica. Tienes el uso de la palabra.
Muchas gracias, Su Majestad. Javier Cremades, presidente de la Asociación de Juristas Internacionales, colegas, compañeros y compañeras del panel, un saludo muy especial para el querido Eduardo Ferrer, nuestro moderador, presidente por 2 años brillantes de la Corte Interamericana, muy activo siempre en todo lo que tiene que ver con la lucha por los derechos humanos y por los principios a los que este panel está dedicado. Un saludo también muy especial a Diego García Sayán y a mis compañeras y compañeros en este panel. Para la Corte Interamericana, que me honro en representar en esta actividad tan importante, y para mí en lo personal, es un honor acudir a sumar nuestras voces a un homenaje a una mujer extraordinaria y a una jueza que siempre extrañaremos en el mundo, que es Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Siguiendo su ejemplo, esperamos que algún día haya paridad de género, que algún día haya igualdad en el uso, el ejercicio, el disfrute de los derechos humanos, porque ella abrió senderos que aún estamos empezando a recorrer y que en su memoria y su nombre tenemos que seguir recorriendo. Para la Corte Interamericana, y estoy segura de que en esta actividad lo habrán mencionado anteriormente, ha sido un desafío muy grande en medio de todos los desafíos de todos los días en la lucha por los derechos humanos y en la obligación de respetar los derechos humanos que tienen los estados de la región. Ha sido un desafío muy grande, lo que significó a partir de marzo del año 2020 la aparición de esta pandemia que sigue azotando al mundo. Yo diría que con una gran claridad, en abril mismo del año 2020, la Corte emitió una declaración que por entonces llamamos COVID y derechos humanos, COVID-19 y derechos humanos. Allí llamábamos la atención de los estados para señalarles que en los desafíos que se venían, tenían que tener muy en cuenta que todo debía hacerse, todas las medidas que se tomaron y se tomaran, debían hacerse dentro del respeto a los derechos fundamentales de las personas, de los adultos, de las adultas, de las menores, de los menores, de todos los grupos que usualmente son discriminados y siguen siendo discriminados en nuestra región. Yo creo que nos quedamos un poco cortos en lo que presentimos iba a ser un desafío inmenso, porque lo que fue la violencia contra la mujer siguió aumentando. Lo que sigue siendo un azote en nuestra región espantoso, en cada uno de nuestros países, por los derechos de las mujeres, por el respeto a su vida, a su dignidad, a su humanidad, a su igualdad, sigue siendo abrumador. Lo mismo lo que ocurre con grupos de lo que normalmente, o no sé por qué nos hemos acostumbrado a llamar grupos en situación de vulnerabilidad. En realidad no están en situaciones de vulnerabilidad. En realidad lo que pasa es que la discriminación que sufren los colocan en una situación de enorme injusticia en lo que es el uso y disfrute de sus derechos humanos. Nosotros en la Corte Interamericana, y lo ha mencionado Diego García y lo mencionó también el juez Ferrer, hemos dedicado por años nuestros mejores esfuerzos al dictar sentencias, hacer evidente lo que es la disparidad en el género. Lo hemos hecho desde el principio, no. La verdad es que la Corte estuvo un poco atrasada en esto porque fue por a principios del siglo XXI, a partir del año 2006, en una sentencia precisamente contra el Estado peruano, que comenzó a establecerse claramente la diferencia y el impacto diferente que tienen la violación de los derechos humanos cuando se trata de hombres que cuando se trata de mujeres, cuando se trata de menores que cuando se trata de adultos. A partir de entonces hemos trabajado intensamente en esa línea. Y también se ha trabajado mucho en la línea de los derechos económicos, sociales y culturales, que sean reconocidos como derechos independientes y que sean atribuidos en el uso de su goce y su disfrute a los grupos, por ejemplo, indígenas. La visibilización de esos derechos nos ha ocupado un enorme tiempo y además, en algo que mencionaba Diego García, que es muy importante para nosotros, en todo lo que es el capítulo de reparaciones. Esa contribución que la Corte Interamericana ha hecho en la materia de reparaciones individuales y colectivas, que creemos que ha estado llegando ya a los queridos colegas de las otras cortes regionales, es muy importante. Es realmente que estamos viviendo momentos difíciles, por lo que actividades como esta que nos llaman la atención sobre el legado de Ruth Bader Ginsburg, sobre la lucha contra la impunidad, es fundamental. En la medida en que el principio de derecho sea el que rija la actividad de los estados y rija los derechos de los seres humanos que hoy día estamos siendo afectados en una forma atroz por la pandemia y por el uso arbitrario del poder de parte de muchos gobernantes en el mundo y en nuestra región, que impactan nuestros derechos, que impactan nuestro medio ambiente. Vamos a tener que seguir luchando por la memoria de Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Muchas gracias, señor presidente, moderador, y de nuevo un saludo muy cordial, muy afectuoso a mis colegas de los tribunales regionales de derechos humanos, herederos como somos todos de la lucha que nació en el mundo en 1945 a partir de la Declaración Universal. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, querida Elizabeth, querida presidenta de la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos. Now I would like to give the floor to Honorable Lady Justice Imanidad Aboud, President of the African Court of Human and People's Rights. President Imanidad Aboud is a national of Tanzania. She was elected a judge in 2018 and was recently elected president last month. As you know, the African Court is the youngest of the 3 regional human rights tribunals. Her Excellency has the floor.
Thank you. Your Majesty, Honorable President of International and Regional Courts of Human Rights and other international courts, dear jurists, Mr. Cremades, President of the World Jurists Association, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed, I can say that. It is my utmost honor and privilege to be part of this event organized by the World Law Congress to discuss the varied, timely and topical question of the contribution of international courts to uphold equality and the rule of law. I would like, before diving into the substance of my statement, extend my appreciation and that of the African Court to the organizers of this World Law Congress. As the African Court commemorates this year its 15th years of operation, its commitment to uphold the rule of law has never been this relevant and topical. Having just taken over as the president, as the moderator said, of the African Court, I also made it a point of importance to attend this event, as it gives me the opportunity to meet with the leaders of sister institutions. The present meeting is indeed a platform to continue discussing issues of common interest. In particular, I have in mind the emerging framework of cooperation, which has recently led to the meeting between the registries of the African Court and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, but also the tripartite Second International Human Rights Forum organized jointly by the Africa, the European, and the Inter-American Courts of Human Rights. In this age of globalization and digitization, judicial dialogue has become one of the most effective ways to share experience and strengthen capacity for an improved administration of justice. Honorable colleagues and distinguished members of the audience, allow me now to turn to the substantive discussion of the day, that is the contribution of our courts to guaranteeing equality and the law and the rule of law. As we are aware, equality and the rule of the law are not necessarily two distinct concepts or principles. It is indeed generally agreed that equality is one of the components of the rule of the law, which in turn is one of the main tenets of constitutional democracy. As such, being a human rights instrument, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights does not expressly provide for the rule of law, either as a principle or a right. Conversely, several rights or principles guaranteed in the Charter are components of the rule of law, such as equality, non-discrimination, fair trial, legality, and proportionality. Allow me now to say that in dealing with equality under the realm of non-discrimination, I share with you the ruling of the African Court in a matter known as that of the African Commission on Human Rights, on Human and People's Rights versus Republic of Kenya. In this case, involved the Ongek indigenous people who lived as hunter-gatherers since time immemorial in the place called the Mau Forest on the territory of the Republic of Kenya. The Ongek indigenous people have for decades been denied the recognition of tribal or ethnic status, and their plight continued in the post-independence era under successful administration of the respondent state. A group of Ongek and civil society organizations took the matter to the African Commission, which then filed an application before the African Court, as provided under Article 5 of the protocol established the court. In the relevant part of the case, the applicant alleged that the Ongek indigenous people had been denied the recognition of a tribal or ethnic status in discriminatory manner compared to others, but similar ethnic or tribal groups in the respondent state, which the court found was contrary to non-discrimination as guaranteed under Article 2 of the African Charter. In respect of the same case, the court considered that it is not sufficient for the respondent state to enact legislation that prohibits discrimination, but it must also ensure that such laws are effectively implemented. This case can be said to be a significant contribution to the protection of equality in involving indigenous people as marginalized group and deals with situation of massive violation of human rights. Besides, the court took an approach to equality that goes beyond passive legislation to embrace active implementation of the state's international obligations. As you may be aware, the African Charter is one of if not the only regional human rights instrument which expressly provides for people's rights, and the judgment rendered by the African Court in this matter was of a great significance in Kenya, but also in the region at large. It must be noted that indigenous groups, similar to the Ongek of Kenya, live in other countries in the region and face the same challenges in respect of the recognition of enjoyment of their rights. Let me now discuss another component, of which is about equality in and before the law. I will discuss this by giving you one case on equality which pertain more strictly to equal protection of the law and equality before the law applying in the context of political participation. In this case, which is the case of APDH versus Republic of Cote d'Ivoire, the issue arising in the matter is whether the composition of the independent electoral commission of the respondent state abides the principle of equality before the law, where such composition includes a majority of members appointed by the president of the republic or are politically connected to the ruling coalition of political parties. The question was whether this composition favored the president as a candidate to an election compared to other candidates, namely from opposition political parties. The applicant alleged that the impardon law established the Electoral Commission placed certain candidates at an advantage compared to others and therefore violates the right to equality before the law and an equal protection by the law enshrined in several international and regional instruments ratified by the respondent state. The court found that by not placing all the potential candidates on the same footing, the impardon law violates the right to equal protection of the law as enshrined in the African Charter on Democracy and African Charter on Human Rights. The court then ordered the state to amend the law and bring it compliance with its international obligation. The relevant judgment, the relevance of this judgment cannot be overemphasized. As we all know, democracy is in crisis globally, and the failure of their states to uphold or to hold free and fair election has frequently led to violence and further right violation before, during, and after election across the world. It's therefore a cause for satisfaction that following this judgment, the state has undertaken consultation and reshuffled the composition of the Electoral Commission in Cote d'Ivoire. Not satisfied with the manner in which the judgment was implemented by the respondent state, other applicants brought the case before the court, and those were members of parliament. And they were asking the court to order for further reform of that electoral commission. In the second judgment, the court In the case of Suyabi Gore and others, versus Cote d'Ivoire, the court acknowledged the efforts made by the respondent state, but found it in violation of other rights with respect to the composition of Regional Electoral Commission. Prior to this second judgment, the state had undertaken further changes which complied with the same findings of the court. Allow me to now just tell you about the cases involving the right that can be considered as component of the rule of law. I'll just give you one case. This is the case of Sebastian Germain Ajavo versus Republic of Benin. In this case, the applicant alleged, among others, that the law established in CREATE, that is the court for the reparation of economic crime and terrorism, did not meet the standards of fair trial, and its judgments are final, and appeal can only be made to the Supreme Court by the public prosecutor. The applicant, who is one of the leading opposition figure, and many other such personalities were tried by the said Economic Crime Court and could not appeal in judgment before the Superior Court. In its judgment on the merits of the case, the African Court found that the law establishing the Economic Crime Court violates the right to a fair trial, namely the right to appeal. The African Court ordered the respondent state to amend the law and bring it in line with the African Charter. Again, in this case, the execution tabled before the National Assembly of Benin, a draft bill amended the law on the Economic Crime Court to establish the appeals chamber therein. The bill expressly stated being introduced in implementation of the African Court judgment. In discussing the relevance of this judgment, it must be recalled that special courts of the same type of the Benin Economic Crime Court have been established in other African countries. And in some of the cases, they have tried public political figures. The judgment of the court, therefore, became instrumental in upholding the right for fair trial in the extent of political participation and civil rights in general. Finally, let me just tell you about the issue of proportionality. We had a case which was brought by the Tanganyika Law Society, Legal and Human Rights Center, and Reverend Christopher Mtikila versus Tanzania. This was decided on merit. The African Court has adjudicated several cases in relation to limitation of rights, and therefore assessment of such limitation against the traditional proportionality benchmark. One of such cases, as I said, is the Mtikila versus Republic of Tanzania, was on the right to political participation with specific reference whether independent candidates can stand for presidential, parliamentary, and local election in Tanzania. In this case, the applicant alleged that the laws of the respondent state, which require that candidates to this election must be members of and be sponsored by a political party, are contrary to the state's obligation under Article 2, 10, and 13 of the Charter, together with Article 3 of the ICCPR. In examining the allegation, the court found that the limitation to the rights of freedom in the African Charter are only those set in Article 27, sub 2 of the Charter, and that such limitation must take the form of law and of general application, be proportional to the aim pursued, and also be acceptable in democratic society. It was the respondent state submission that it took the limitation approach to political participation based on its history, and to avoid putting the country's unity to test in the context of semi-federalism. Ultimately, and in respect of the proportionality, the court found that the relevant provision of the Constitution of Tanzania did not meet the test of proportionality as required between the aim advanced by the respondent state and limitations prescribed in the Constitution of the country. Yeah, just to end up, I'm winding up. Honorable colleagues, As the above counts reveals, the African Court on Human Rights and People's Rights has made significant contribution to the observance of equality and the rule of law as prescribed under the African Charter, but also in other instruments such as ICCPR. So, as I indicated earlier, the court is open to discuss means through which it can engage further with other international courts to exchange views, practices, and to work to come up with the working method which will help all these institutions to work in a more successful way. These include courts of human rights, which mandated by some instrument, but also tribunal vested with jurisdiction to adjudicate several public international law, given that the court, the African court, due to its extended jurisdiction, is often being asked to pronounce itself on general legal matters that are intersectional with the law of treaties, humanitarian law, refugees law, as well as United Nations human rights instrument. In closing these few remarks, I would like to reiterate my appreciation to the organizers of this event for associating the African Court, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, President Imani Daud-Aboud, for your insights regarding the contribution of the African Court of Human and People's Rights. And congratulations for the first 15 years of your court. Now we will see a video presentation from the Honorable Robert Spano, President of the European Court of Human Rights. President Spano is a national from Iceland and has been serving as a judge since 2013 and was elected President of the Strasbourg Court in 2020. As you know, the European Court of Justice, the European Court of Human Rights has jurisdiction over all 47 member states of the Council of Europe. Can we please see the video?
It is indeed a huge honor for me to address this prestigious global congress and to participate in what can only be called a star-studded panel of eminent court presidents and human rights experts. I'm only sorry that my own judicial work has meant that I cannot be with you in person in Madrid. Let me begin by saluting this tribute to a truly inspirational woman lawyer, law professor, judge, and justice. A woman who has been a role model to many young aspiring lawyers. When in 1993, President Bill Clinton announced his choice of Ruth Bader Ginsburg for the Supreme Court, she responded that for her, the significance of her nomination was that it contributes to the end of the days when women, at least half of the talent pool in our society, appear in high places only as a one-at-a-time performers. Almost 30 years later, can we say with confidence that those days have ended? I think we can all agree that while there has been progress in relation to the rights of women, we are not there yet. This is why the WJA Ruth Bader Ginsburg Medal of Honor is so important in marking the outstanding contribution of women who have, against the odds, reached those high positions in law, in finance, or in politics. I would like to congratulate all of the awardees on their diverse but all exceptional achievements. Turning back to the judicial world and Ruth Bader Ginsburg's comment, a gender-balanced judicial bench is crucial, both for international as well as national courts. Firstly, it clearly ensures the legitimacy of the judiciary in the eyes of the public and strengthens trust in the legal system. Secondly, it improves the quality of judgments through the benefit of a broader range of life experiences. And thirdly, it ensures that we draw from the widest pool of talent and do not inadvertently disadvantage or advantage certain demographic groups. Your focus for this panel is the contribution of international courts in the field of equality and the rule of law. One of the major achievements of the European Court of Human Rights and the European Convention system has been the development of a common body of rules at the European level based on fundamental values. The rule of law is a fundamental value which characterizes that identity as it underpins the whole system and is inherent in all articles of the European Convention on Human Rights. The right to a fair trial constitutes the quintessence of the rule of law and includes the fundamental principle of independent judges. Laws at the domestic level must also reflect the fundamental values inherent in the Convention, such as freedom, tolerance, and broad-mindedness. Exclusion, segregation, and discrimination have no place. Through its rich body of case law, primarily under the Convention's anti-discrimination article, Article 14, the Court has established various areas in which it has found discrimination on the grounds of sex. Given the limited time I have today, I will just focus on one area, the Court's case law on domestic violence. Domestic violence is a form of gender-based violence, which is in turn a form of discrimination against women. The state's failure to protect women against domestic violence may breach their right to equal protection by law, even if this failure is unintentional. This is a human dignity issue. The 2009 Opus v. Turkey judgment was the first case in which the court ruled that domestic violence affects mainly women and that the general and discriminatory judicial passivity of the authorities had created a climate conducive to such violence. This landmark ruling paved the way for the Council of Europe's Istanbul Convention, whose 10th anniversary is being celebrated this year. For my final and concluding remarks, I would like to salute the global voices which this Congress has put together. The European Court of Human Rights recognizes the importance of judicial dialogue at the international level, in particular through its cooperation with the regional human rights courts of the world, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights and the African Court of Human and People's Rights. This institutional cooperation began by way of the San Jose Declaration signed by the 3 presidents of those courts in 2018. I rejoice to see these 2 courts represented by their presidents on this panel. The aim of institutionalizing dialogue was to strengthen human rights protection mechanisms in order to overcome common challenges and threats. Achieving gender equality is our common global challenge. It is a moral imperative, a fundamental condition of human dignity for all. Inequality is also a global threat to democracy and the rule of law. I believe that Ruth Bader Ginsburg would have rejoiced in our attempts to work together for these noble goals. Thank you very much for your attention.
After the presentation by President Spano, it is my pleasure to present the Honorable Piotr Hofmański, President of the International Criminal Court, who is a Polish national. Judge Hofmański has served as a judge since 2015 and was elected president last March. His Excellency has the floor. Welcome, President. I think we have a problem with the sound. We can hear. President Hofmański, can you switch on the... I think it's in your computer. We can't hear. Well, maybe, yes. Can you open the microphone, please? Well, maybe we can go on, and then we come back with President Hofmansky. Now I would like to pass the floor to Honorable Rosario Silva de la Puerta, Vice President of the European Court of Justice. Judge Silva de la Puerta is a Spanish national. She has been serving as a judge since 2003 for the Luxembourg Court, and as you know, the European Court of Justice has jurisdiction over the 27 member states of the European Union. Tiene la palabra la vicepresidenta Rosario Silva de la Puerta, a quien debo agradecer muchísimo que para la Corte Interamericana fue un honor recibirla en el año 2019, antes de la pandemia, en Costa Rica, en la apertura del año judicial, que fue extraordinaria su conferencia. Adelante, señora vicepresidenta.
Muchas gracias, Eduardo, Majestad. Señoras y señores, es para mí un placer estar aquí presente y poder participar en este congreso. Yo represento a un tribunal que tiene la especialidad de no ser un tribunal de derechos humanos como los que han intervenido anteriormente a mí, sino un tribunal con competencia general, pero en el que los derechos humanos tienen una especial relevancia. El tribunal comenzó aplicando los derechos fundamentales como principios generales del derecho comunitario, como se llamaba antes, y después de la entrada en vigor del Tratado de Lisboa y, por tanto, de la Carta, el tribunal se ha dirigido siempre a la interpretación y aplicación de esos derechos fundamentales a través de la Carta. El principio de igualdad, que es el que aquí nos interesa esta tarde, es uno de los fundamentos de la Unión y, como tal, está reconocido en el artículo 2 del Tratado de la Unión Europea. Pero, además, es un derecho fundamental reconocido en la Carta, como antes decíamos. Hay 3 artículos en la Carta que se refieren al principio de igualdad. Por un lado, el artículo 20, que establece la igualdad ante la ley, el artículo 21, que establece el principio de no discriminación entendido de la manera más amplia posible, y, por último, el artículo 23, que establece el principio de igualdad entre hombres y mujeres. Además, existen otras disposiciones del Tratado de Funcionamiento de la Unión Europea que se refieren al principio de igualdad. Así, por ejemplo, el artículo 8 establece como principio de naturaleza transversal que debe informar todas las acciones de la Unión la eliminación de las desigualdades y la promoción de la igualdad entre hombres y mujeres, o el artículo 10, que en la misma línea obliga a la Unión en la definición y puesta en práctica de sus políticas y acciones a combatir cualquier tipo de discriminación. Dado que no tenemos mucho tiempo, me voy a referir a 3 supuestos en los que el Tribunal se ha pronunciado en materia de igualdad o de no discriminación. En primer lugar, el sexo. El Tribunal ha desarrollado una importante jurisprudencia sobre el principio de igualdad hombre-mujer, partiendo al principio de los artículos relativos a la igualdad en materia de empleo y de trabajo. El ejemplo más claro y que todo el mundo conoce es la sentencia de 8 de abril de 1976 en el asunto de Fresnes, donde por primera vez el Tribunal reconoció que el principio de igualdad de remuneración entre trabajadores y trabajadoras forma parte de los fundamentos de lo que era entonces la comunidad y que el artículo que lo reconocía, es decir, el 109 del Tratado CE, que ahora es el 157 del Tratado de Funcionamiento, es susceptible de aplicación directa y, por tanto, atribuye derechos a los particulares que los órganos jurisdiccionales nacionales deben salvaguardar. Además, según el Tribunal, el cumplimiento de la prohibición de discriminaciones, tanto directas como indirectas, por razón de sexo constituye un requisito de legalidad de las disposiciones de derecho de la Unión. Igualmente, se desprende de reiterada jurisprudencia que una disposición discrimina indirectamente a las trabajadoras cuando, a pesar de estar redactada en términos neutros, perjudica en realidad a un porcentaje mucho mayor de mujeres que de hombres, a no ser que esta medida esté justificada por razones objetivas ajenas a cualquier tipo de discriminación en función del sexo. En segundo lugar, me voy a referir a otro ejemplo en cuanto al principio de igualdad, que es en relación con la religión o las convicciones. El Tribunal se ha pronunciado sobre este motivo de discriminación respecto de 3 supuestos: la prohibición de signos visibles de convicciones políticas, filosóficas o religiosas, el sacrificio ritual de animales y la religión o la convicción como exigencia profesional esencial. Por lo que se refiere a la noción de religión, el Tribunal considera que cubre tanto el forum internum, es decir, ciertas convicciones, y el forum externo, es decir, la manifestación en público de una determinada fe religiosa. Además, el llevar signos o ropa para manifestar su religión o sus convicciones está cubierto por la libertad de religión, de conciencia y de pensamiento que está reconocida en el artículo 10 de la Carta. Sin embargo, una norma o exigencia que trata de manera idéntica a todos los trabajadores de una misma empresa, imponiéndoles de manera general o indiferenciada una neutralidad vestimentaria, no establece una diferencia de trato directamente fundada sobre la religión. Igualmente, la voluntad del empresario de mantener en sus relaciones con los clientes una política de neutralidad debe considerarse un objetivo legítimo, especialmente cuando solo se ven afectados los trabajadores que tienen relación con los clientes. En cuanto a las normas relativas a la matanza ritual de animales, que exigen el aturdimiento previo del animal, el Tribunal considera que, aunque pueden constituir una limitación del derecho a la libertad de religión, estas normas respetan las exigencias del artículo 52 de la Carta al garantizar el contenido esencial de este derecho, al referirse solo a un aspecto específico del acto ritual y responder a un objetivo general, como es el bienestar de los animales y ser proporcionado. Por último, para poder justificar una diferencia de trato basada en la religión o en las convicciones, el Tribunal considera que debe existir un vínculo directo entre la exigencia profesional impuesta por el empleador y la actividad de que se trate. Tal vínculo puede derivarse bien de la naturaleza de la actividad, por ejemplo, cuando ella implica participar en la determinación de la ética de la religión o de la Iglesia de que se trate, o bien colaborar en su misión de proclamación, bien de las condiciones en las que deba dicha actividad ejercerse. Y en tercer y último lugar, me voy a referir a la orientación sexual. El Tribunal ha analizado este motivo de discriminación básicamente en relación con 3 cuestiones: las condiciones de empleo, las prestaciones de seguridad social y la libre circulación de ciudadanos de la Unión. En cuanto a las condiciones de empleo, el Tribunal ha interpretado una directiva que es la 2078 respecto de este motivo de discriminación, reconociendo la legitimación activa de una asociación cuyo objetivo es promover la cultura y el respeto de los derechos de las personas de orientación sexual diversa para el ejercicio de acciones en caso de actos discriminatorios contra las personas de esta categoría. En materia de seguridad social, en el asunto Maruco, interpretando la Directiva 79/7, el Tribunal se refirió a la no discriminación en materia de prestaciones de seguridad social y reconoció la existencia de una discriminación cuando el miembro superviviente de una pareja inscrita tras fallecer el otro miembro no tiene derecho a percibir una pensión de viudedad equivalente a la que se otorga al cónyuge supérstite. Igualmente, en el asunto MB, el Tribunal analizó los requisitos para obtener una pensión de jubilación en caso de cambio de sexo, concluyendo en la existencia de discriminación al tratar de manera diferente a una persona que ha cambiado de sexo después de haberse casado, a la que se exige la anulación previa del matrimonio, y a una persona que ha conservado su texto de nacimiento y está casada. Finalmente, en relación con la libre circulación de ciudadanos de la Unión, el Tribunal, en su sentencia Coman, reconoció el derecho del nacional de un país tercero, del mismo sexo que el ciudadano de la Unión, que ha contraído matrimonio con éste en un Estado miembro de conformidad con el derecho de ese Estado, a residir en el territorio del Estado miembro del ciudadano de la Unión, no pudiéndosele denegar el derecho de residencia debido a que el derecho de ese Estado miembro no contempla el matrimonio entre personas del mismo sexo. Estos no son más que ejemplos de lo que es nuestro día a día cotidiano. Muchos pueden pensar que el Tribunal de Justicia, en la medida en, como yo decía al principio, es un tribunal de carácter general, tiene muy poca relación con los derechos fundamentales. Creo que cada vez son más los asuntos en los que, de una forma directa o indirecta, la aplicación de los derechos fundamentales viene ante nosotros y, por supuesto, del principio de igualdad. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Vicepresidenta Rosario Silva de la Puerta. And now we return with Honorable Piotr Hofmanski, President of the International Criminal Court. I will please ask President Hofmanski, we're a little bit bad in time, so can you give us your presentation in 2-3 minutes?
Thank you.
We're sorry. We apologize.
Excellent. Excellencies, esteemed judges from around the world, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Javier Cremades, President of the World Jurors Association, Mr. Moderator, Judge McGregor. I'd like to start by thanking the organizers for inviting me to take part in this panel discussion. Unfortunately, due to other obligation, I cannot be personally present in Madrid. But as we have all seen in the last 16 months, it's actually possible to have very fruitful discussions, even we are located in different parts of the world. And so today I address you from the studio and the premises of the ICC in The Hague. The topic of the panel is intriguing. Equality and the rule of law, contribution of international courts. I say intriguing because equality is a word or concept which appears in many aspects of the law and many aspects of what we do in international courts. We could speak about the equality of arms, a key element of fair trial standards that is truly essential to the legitimacy of the international criminal proceedings. There can be no fair trials without an effective defense. Or we could speak about the need for gender equality in the judicial profession and among judges more specifically. On that note, I am proud that the International Criminal Court has a perfect gender balance in the bench, with 9 female and 9 male judges. In the past, we have had majorities on both genders at different times, and on one point also an all-female presidency. But we have room to improvement in terms of gender balance among our senior staff, so there is work to be done. Another phase of equality is linked to jurisdiction. The law of the ICC, that is the Rome Statute, its founding treaty, provides that the ICC is not a substitute for national courts. It is not a higher court than national courts. Under the Rome Statute, national courts have primacy, and the ICC can step if only when the competent national authorities are not investigating or prosecuting. This is what we call the principle of complementarity. In other words, the ICC is not trying to assert any kind of dominance over national jurisdiction or their judges. Thinking about the equality of judges, one must also point that we judges must be humble before the law. And part of the humility means that we should not think that we are better than all our colleagues. Our courts and our respective chambers may have different roles, but as judges, we are equal. The role of each of us is to apply the law independently, impartially, and conscientiously. We could also speak about the principle of equality before the law. In that respect, unfortunately, I have to note that the more than 70 states have not yet joined the ICC founding treaty, the Rome Statute. And therefore, their citizens do not enjoy the same protection of international law against atrocity crime as do the nationals of 123 states parties of the ICC. But this is, of course, a well-known dilemma of international law. We can't promote international principles to the best of our ability. But at the end of the sovereign decision of each state is to decide whether to join the treaty or not. In any case, I use this opportunity to call upon all states that have not yet done so to join the Rome Statute for the sake of enhancing the international criminal justice system. From the perspective of what constitutes the essence of the international criminal law, one needs to point out the additional very important aspect of the principle of equality. It is about equal access to reparations. Reparations for victims of crimes under the ICC's jurisdiction play a key role in the system. Victims expect not only justice to be done to their tormentors, but also to repair the damages they have suffered. And indeed, the ICC is doing a lot in this direction. However, ensuring equal access to reparations seems to be extremely difficult task for various reasons. One of them is the undoubted difficulty in identifying the victims. We cannot always provide potential victims with conditions in which, without endangering themselves and their loved ones, they could seek compensations for the damage caused to them. We also do not always have the financial resources to implement as ambitious reparation programs as we would like to. Convicted persons do not usually have such resources, and donations to the ICC's Trust Fund for Victims are not sufficient in times of global crisis. Acquittals can be another reason
President Hermansky,
for reparation cannot be made.
I'm sorry.
Please note that the acquittal in the ICC happens often not because they not commit, but because the specific person in trial is not found guilty for it. And if there is no conviction, the ICC cannot order reparation. Fortunately, there is partial way around it. Is the so-called assistance mandate for our transport for victims. The assistance mandate.
President Hermansky, I'm sorry, we're a little bit tight in time.
Yes, the last sentence. I would like to just say the assistance mandate gives the trust fund the possibility of funding preparation type programs regardless of the verdict issued by the court. And I will stop on this. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, President Hermansky, and for understanding us about the time. We have heard the voices of the leaders of 5 of the most important international tribunals in the world. This is the first time that these courts of different systems have met to engage in a dialogue. I would like deeply thank your excellencies for your outstanding presentations. The rich dialogue today serves to illustrate how international courts contribute to equality and the rule of law, and also shows the impact of these courts on democracy and human rights and to prevalence of the fundamental principles and values that unite us: justice, peace, liberty, freedom, equality, non-discrimination, respect, tolerance, and solidarity. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Damos por terminado el presente panel para continuar con la clausura. Muchas gracias.